Basilio didn't have parents. His mother died a long time ago when he was still very little. Maybe that's why, having not known a woman's affection and care from childhood, he grew up so gloomy and unsociable. His father raised him. Basilio was a late and only child for his parents, and when his mother passed away, his father was already old, so he never remarried. So, they lived together, he and his father, alone in this world, not needing anyone. Now his father was gone too. An incurable illness took the old man, he burned out in a few months. Basilio didn't even have time to understand how it all happened. The doctors just shrugged, saying that sometimes these things happen. He buried his father and began to think about how he would live on. Should he go to the city? But who would need him there without a profession or education? He had no relatives in the city, nowhere to stay. And here, in his native place, he at least had a roof over his head. Finding a bride in their remote village was nearly impossible. So Basilio lived alone in his parents' house. In the summer, he herded the village cattle, and in the winter, he did a bit of hunting. His grandfather used to take him hunting since he was a child. And so he survived year after year. The same thing, with no hope for the future. But he never got discouraged or complained about his fate. He believed that everything was still ahead of him. He would have a family and kids, and they would all live together long and happily. His children should have better luck in life than he did, and he would do everything possible to make that happen. When Basilio felt he couldn't take it anymore, almost to the point of despair, he would take his father's gun off the wall, sling a backpack over his shoulders with everything he needed for life in the forest, and head into the taiga to the old cabin his grandfather Diego had built. In the forest cabin, Basilio felt much better than among people. He would brew tea, light the old kerosene lamp, and sit down to drink his tea. Also, books were his salvation in this lonely world. He read a lot since childhood, traveling with the heroes of the stories on exotic adventures, experiencing all the hardships of life and blows of fate with them. In a secluded corner, on his shelf, he always had many books and magazines. Sometimes, pondering the meaning of life, Basilio would start humming a simple tune. He would make up little rhymes, dreaming that someday he would sing these songs to his son. It didn't matter that he couldn't carry a tune, he sang with his soul. He wasn't afraid of the forest. Since childhood, he had wandered the taiga with his father, collecting mushrooms and berries, pine cones and nuts, hunting game, and fishing. He had loved the forest's tranquility and peace since childhood. He knew from his father that the forest would not betray or hurt him, unlike people with their treachery and insatiable passions. So he wasn't afraid of the forest, he felt at home there, knowing all the trails, both human and animal, made. Not far from the cabin flowed a forest stream. The water sprang right from under a rock, and it was so cold and delicious that it was impossible to drink enough. You drank and wanted more. Basilio fetched water for tea from there. It wasn't far from the cabin, always downhill and to the right along a path for about 300 meters, and there was the spring. But only he knew that, and a stranger would never find it. And who would be here, in this remote place? Except for Basilio, no one came here. So, one warm summer day, Basilio was overwhelmed by such sadness that he couldn't bear it. He grabbed the gun from the wall, slung the backpack over his shoulders, and headed into the forest. He reached the cabin by evening. It was getting dark. To avoid missing his evening tea, he had to hurry. So he quickly went to the stream with a bucket. Going down the hill and briskly walking to the spring, he stumbled upon a lynx lying right across the path. The forest cat was dead, and nearby, a soft, plaintive mewing could be heard. Stepping toward the sound and parting the tea bushes, Basilio saw in the grass a small lynx kitten, the offspring of the dead lynx. Judging by its size, it was less than a month old. Still so tiny. Someone had shot its mother, but apparently, she had managed to escape and carry the baby away from the site of the massacre and hide in the grass. How could someone do this? How can anyone kill such beauty? Basilio murmured aloud. He felt so sorry for the dead lynx, but he felt even more pity for her orphaned kitten. He knew all too well what it was like to grow up without a mother. Basilio picked up the lynx kitten and carried it to the forest cabin. I can't just leave the little one to fate. In the cabin, he laid an old quilt in the corner, fed the kitten what he could, and settled it down for the night. What should I call you? Basilio wondered aloud. He went through many names that came to mind, but nothing seemed right. The only names that came to him were common cat names, like Simba. He called out, Simba, Simba. The lynx kitten looked at him with interest. Well, I guess that's it. No objections to Simba. The kitten, cozy on the warm quilt, twitched in its sleep, moved its paws in the air, and dreamed its wild dreams. It probably dreamed of its mother because it smacked its lips loudly as if drinking warm milk. So, Basilio and Simba lived in the forest cabin. In the village, Basilio built a large enclosure in a spacious shed, and when they went to the forest together, Simba could run freely wherever he pleased. After all, home is home, but the forest was the real home for the lynx. Time passed. The lynx kitten grew up and became a fully grown adult. He turned into a beautiful and graceful animal. One day, after another trip to the forest, Basilio returned home alone. Simba had met a mate in the forest and decided to stay with her. Basilio was very upset about it. He understood perfectly well that a lynx is a wild animal and feels better in the wild. Even Simba has a family now, and I'm still alone, Basilio lamented. A couple more years passed. He often lived in his forest cabin, but he hadn't seen his foundling since. He often thought about him and wondered where he was and how he was doing. One autumn day, while sorting through the mushrooms he had gathered, Basilio saw a lynx emerge from the forest and walk right up to his cabin. Simba, you're back, he shouted, running out onto the porch. Following the wild cat, a young girl with a basket stepped out of the thicket. Her eyes were frightened. She was breathing heavily, clearly exhausted. Seeing a living person, she began to cry and fell to her knees, her shoulders shaking with loud sobs. Basilio approached her and tried to calm her down. It turned out that the girl had gotten lost in the forest and couldn't find her way out of the thicket until she met the wild cat. The lynx didn't hurry to leave her. It seemed to be trying to show her the way. The girl intuitively followed the wild animal and finally came out to Basilio's forest cabin. How did you not get scared of the wild animal? A lynx is a very dangerous cat, but not this one. I raised him from a small kitten, so he is friendly to people, especially to someone as nice as you. And Basilio petted Simba's head. From that forest encounter, Basilio and Adriana never parted again. They created a strong, happy family and had 3 children.